Some places in the woods feel off before you even step in, like the trees are watching, like the air's too still. Animals avoid it. Even the wind won't pass through. People who enter talk about a heavy feeling, like being followed by something that never makes a sound. You might hear sticks snap right behind you, but when you turn, nothing's there. Just empty forest. Too quiet, too calm. It doesn't chase or roar. It just waits, close enough to hear you breathe, and closer every time you look away. In the rugged wilderness of Washington State, 1997, Redwater Pines National Forest lay tucked against the jagged edge of the Cascades like a forgotten postcard. Towering Douglas firs, knife-edge ravines, and mist that never lifted. The underfunded park had earned a peculiar reputation among locals for its suffocating fog banks and the eerie silence that seemed to swallow hikers whole. For 12 years, Dean Holloway had called this wilderness his office, brushing off the hushed stories from nearby towns about yellow-eyed creatures and footprints big enough to bathe a child in. Dean had built his career on practicality and reason. At 43, the weathered ranger had seen everything from lost hikers hallucinating from dehydration to poachers spinning tales to cover their tracks. Every mysterious sound had a logical explanation. Every shadow had a source. Tall tales about forest monsters belonged around campfires, not in his official reports. In late September 1997, Dean's supervisor assigned him a routine 3-day inspection along the rarely traveled High Spine Trail, a 15-mile path that wound through the densest section of the forest. Budget cuts had left maintenance spotty, and rangers needed to document hazardous conditions before the winter storms arrived. Dean packed light, just essentials for the solo journey and equipment to document trail conditions. He would stay at the maintenance cabin that marked the halfway point, a simple metal-roofed structure with a wood stove and basic amenities. The first day passed uneventfully, as Dean noted washed-out sections and photographed fallen trees. He reached the cabin by late afternoon, unloaded his gear, and prepared his evening meal. As twilight descended, he reviewed his notes by lantern light, occasionally glancing through the single window at the darkening forest outside. The stillness felt oppressive, unusual even for the deep woods. No owl calls, no rustling of nocturnal creatures, just absolute silence. Around midnight, the first anomalies began. Dean later reported hearing distinct branch breaks in the darkness, not the typical snap of a deer passing through underbrush, but powerful cracks that suggested something substantial, moving deliberately through the trees. He initially attributed the sounds to a black bear, common enough in these parts, and secured the cabin door more firmly before returning to his sleeping bag. The second night brought escalation. Small rocks began hitting the cabin exterior at irregular intervals, pinging against the metal roof and wooden walls. Dean swept his flashlight beam across the tree line, but spotted nothing beyond the first few yards of illuminated foliage. The ranger noted in his journal that the throwing seemed purposeful, almost like a test, each projectile slightly larger than the last. At one point, something large moved just beyond his field of vision, causing the hair on his neck to stand up. Years of wilderness experience had honed his senses, and something primitive within him recognized a predator's presence. On the third night, after a day of documenting trail conditions, with increasingly distracted attention, Dean experienced what would ultimately end his forestry career. He had secured the cabin particularly well, pushing the small table against the door as an additional precaution, after finding enormous, unidentifiable tracks in the soft earth nearby. Impressions he estimated at 16 inches long with 5 distinct toe marks, far too large for any known regional wildlife. Just after 2 a.m., something struck the cabin door with such tremendous force that the top hinge bolt completely separated from the frame. Dean jolted awake as the door sagged inward, a gap appearing at the top. Seizing his camp axe and flashlight, he backed against the far wall. The powerful beam revealed nothing through the crack, but a deep, wet breathing sound emanated from just outside, a gurgling inhalation unlike anything he'd ever heard from a bear or a cougar. When he finally mustered the courage to approach the damaged door, his flashlight beam caught movement. Through the trees, illuminated briefly by moonlight filtering through branches, stood a massive silhouette. The figure was impossibly tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in what appeared to be dark fur. Dean estimated its height at over 8 feet, its mass at least 800 pounds. The creature moved with surprising grace for its size, melting back into the forest before Dean could focus his light directly on it. The ranger spent the remainder of the night wide-eyed and trembling, axe clutched to his chest as heavy footfalls circled the cabin until dawn. When Dean finally emerged at first light, he abandoned half his equipment and made the return journey in record time, constantly looking over his shoulder. He arrived at Ranger headquarters filthy, exhausted, and visibly shaken. Without explanation, he submitted his resignation that same afternoon. When pressed for details about the inspection, he simply stated that there was something in the deep forest that didn't want human presence, and he had finally decided to listen. Dean Holloway relocated to Carson City, Nevada within the month, taking a position at an airport car rental counter. He never went camping again and refused all interviews about his final days as a ranger. The maintenance cabin was scheduled for routine inspection the following spring, but a severe storm damaged it beyond repair before anyone could investigate Dean's claims. To this day, locals still avoid the High Spine Trail after sunset, claiming the area belongs to something ancient that considers humans trespassers in its domain. The Aberystwyth woodlands had stood as silent sentinels along the Welsh countryside for centuries, their ancient oak and ash trees bearing witness to countless local legends. The dense forest bordered fertile farmland, creating a picturesque landscape that drew city dwellers seeking tranquility away from urban chaos. In early 2006, Gareth Price and his wife Meredith made precisely this transition, purchasing a quaint stone farmhouse on the forest edge after growing weary of their hectic lives in Cardiff. The rustic property dated back to the 1800s, featuring thick stone walls and a slate roof weathered by generations of Welsh rain. Local folklore spoke of the woods as a place of mystery, old tales of fey folk and strange creatures that roamed after dark. Gareth, a practical accountant by training, dismissed these stories as simple country superstition designed to keep children from wandering too far from home. Their small Welsh sheepdog, Piper, initially thrived in the countryside setting. The energetic canine spent hours exploring the meadows and racing along the tree line, her black and white coat flashing between trunks as she investigated new scents. Gareth often worked from home, enjoying afternoon walks with Piper that stretched deeper into the woods as they grew more comfortable with the property's surroundings. By late March, however, subtle changes began to disturb their rural idyll. Gareth first noticed Piper's reluctance to approach the forest during their daily walks. The once adventurous dog would halt abruptly 20 yards from the tree line, her ears flattened against her skull, refusing to proceed despite Gareth's encouragement. Some primal instinct seemed to have awakened in the animal, a warning system humans had long since lost. Unusual occurrences accumulated as spring progressed. Gareth reported hearing heavy scratching against the rear garden wall after midnight, initially attributing the sounds to wildlife. His certainty wavered after discovering deep grooves in the ancient stone, marks that started nearly 7 feet above ground level. No fox or badger could reach such heights. In early April, while working late at his desk, Gareth glimpsed movement through the kitchen window. In the pale moonlight stood what he first took to be a misshapen tree trunk at the garden's edge. This impression lasted only seconds before the realization struck that the dark silhouette was standing upright, its massive shoulders clearly visible against the night sky. When Gareth blinked and leaned forward for a better look, the figure had vanished, leaving only swaying branches in its wake. The following morning, Gareth inspected the property boundary, discovering a section of the stone wall where moss had been recently disturbed. Embedded in the damp earth below were what appeared to be enormous barefoot impressions, far too large and distinctly shaped to belong to any known local wildlife. He shared these findings with no one, fearing ridicule or concern about his mental state. Meredith traveled frequently for her consultancy work, leaving Gareth alone with Piper for extended periods. During one such absence in late April, the situation escalated dramatically. Piper began sleeping pressed against Gareth's bedroom door rather than in her usual spot by the hearth. The scratching sounds grew louder, now accompanied by heavy footfalls that circled the property after dark. Gareth installed additional exterior lighting, but the bulbs frequently malfunctioned, plunging sections of the yard into darkness at critical moments. On a foggy Tuesday morning, the inevitable confrontation occurred. Gareth released Piper into the fenced garden for her morning routine before preparing breakfast. When the dog failed to appear at her usual scratching time, Gareth called for her repeatedly with no response. Stepping outside, he found the garden gate ajar, something impossible without deliberate manipulation of the complex iron latch. Panic rising, Gareth searched the immediate surroundings before venturing toward the forest edge. The unusually thick fog reduced visibility to mere yards, transforming familiar landmarks into looming shadows. Near the tree line, Piper's distinctive paw prints led directly into the woods. Alongside them, massive barefoot impressions pressed deep into the soft earth. Following this macabre trail, Gareth discovered disturbing evidence: drag marks, broken underbrush, and tufts of Piper's black and white fur clinging to snapped branches nearly 6 feet above ground level. Gareth's search grew increasingly desperate as he penetrated deeper into the woods than ever before. The fog seemed to thicken around him, muffling sounds and disorienting his sense of direction. After hours of fruitless searching, he returned home defeated, clothes soaked with dew and scratched from pushing through brambles. That night brought the final confrontation. Around 2 a.m., heavy footsteps approached the house directly. Something substantial pressed against the living room window with enough force to create a spider web of cracks across the glass. When Gareth finally summoned the courage to pull back the curtains, he found nothing outside, but a massive palm print remained on the glass, its 5-fingered impression nearly twice the size of a human hand. Gareth never filed a police report about Piper's disappearance. He listed the house for sale the following week, claiming the country life hadn't suited them after all. When his neighbors inquired about the sudden departure, Gareth offered vague explanations about career opportunities in the city. Within a month, the Prices had relocated to a modern apartment building in downtown Birmingham, surrounded by concrete and streetlights. Local residents still report hearing occasional canine yelping from the Aberystwyth woodlands, particularly on foggy mornings. Gareth steadfastly refused to discuss the events leading to his departure, changing the subject whenever the Welsh countryside was mentioned. The farmhouse changed hands twice more in rapid succession, with each subsequent owner departing after less than 6 months in residence. It now stands empty, its stone walls gradually yielding to encroaching ivy, while the adjacent forest grows ever closer to the abandoned structure. The Yelang Forest Reserve sprawled across the rugged highlands of Yunnan Province like an emerald labyrinth, its ancient trees and dense undergrowth concealing secrets that local villagers had whispered about for generations. Established as a protected wilderness area in 1982, the reserve encompassed over 200,000 hectares of subtropical mountain forest that served as home to numerous endangered species and, according to regional folklore, entities that defied scientific classification. In May 2018, Bradley O'Connell, an experienced 32-year-old hiking enthusiast from Melbourne, Australia, organized an expedition into the reserve's remote northern section with 3 friends: Hiroshi Tanaka, a Japanese wildlife photographer, Elena Petrova, a Russian botanical researcher, and Marcus Whitfield, a British adventure travel blogger. The group had connected through an international outdoor enthusiasts forum and bonded over previous successful treks across challenging terrains in South America and Central Asia. Their journey began promisingly. The group obtained proper permits, hired local guides for the initial entry points, and meticulously planned their route through the less-traveled northern highlands. Their intended 5-day circuit would take them through areas renowned for rare orchid species and spectacular limestone formations. Bradley had researched extensively, noting that the area's few documented hiking accidents typically involved falls or exposure rather than wildlife encounters. The first day proceeded without incident as the group established a rhythm, taking photographs of mist-shrouded valleys, and cataloging unusual plant specimens. Their guides departed at the predetermined waypoint, scheduled to rendezvous with them at the exit point 4 days later. As evening approached, the hikers made camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees draped with moss and vines. Unusual occurrences began during their first night. Bradley later reported hearing rhythmic tapping sounds from multiple directions around their campsite. Not the random noises of forest wildlife, but patterns that suggested deliberate communication. The others dismissed his concerns, attributing the sounds to woodpeckers or water droplets. However, the following morning, they discovered their hiking boots had been rearranged outside their tents, placed in a perfect line facing the forest's deeper reaches. The group proceeded with their planned route, though with heightened awareness. By midday, Elena noted that the forest had grown unusually quiet, the normal symphony of birds and insects replaced by an oppressive silence. Hiroshi's wildlife photography yielded no subjects despite the area's reputed biodiversity. Marcus recorded in his journal that the trees seemed to close in behind them as they progressed, though he attributed this observation to the mounting unease affecting the group. That afternoon, they discovered odd structures in a small ravine, arrangements of branches woven into complex geometric patterns suspended between trees. No park documentation mentioned local artisans or ranger activities creating such displays. The formations appeared recent, with freshly broken branches and disturbed vegetation around their bases. As they established their second campsite near a small stream, Bradley insisted on building a larger-than-usual campfire despite the mild temperatures. The night descended with unnatural swiftness, the canopy above blocking even the faintest starlight. Around 1 a.m., a high-pitched screech tore through the darkness, not the cry of any known regional wildlife, but something that Bradley later described as almost metallically precise, yet undeniably organic. The timeline of subsequent events remains reconstructed from Bradley's fragmented statements and physical evidence. Their campsite was violently disrupted sometime between 1:30 and 2:30 a.m. Tents were shredded, equipment scattered across 50 meters of forest floor. Deep gouges marked nearby trees at heights of 3 to 4 meters, too high for conventional wildlife, too patterned for natural damage. Bradley recalled waking to screams and a powerful, inhuman screeching sound directly outside his tent. In the chaos that followed, he glimpsed only partial images, massive silhouettes moving with unexpected speed between trees, and Elena frantically attempting to reach the emergency satellite phone. Bradley slipped down a steep embankment while fleeing, striking his head against a rock formation. He regained consciousness hours later, wedged beneath a fallen log with no sign of his companions. Disoriented and concussed, Bradley crawled and stumbled for nearly 18 hours before reaching a maintenance road where park rangers discovered him. His statements to authorities described creatures moving bipedally through the forest, standing approximately 2.5 meters tall with unusual proportions and producing clicking vocalizations unlike any known primate. The search and rescue operation launched immediately covered a 10-kilometer radius from the attack site. After 5 days, the search yielded grim discoveries: shredded backpacks, a single hiking boot containing partial remains, and Marcus's journal with its final entry abruptly terminating mid-sentence. At the campsite itself, investigators documented tree damage consistent with extraordinary force, deep impressions in the soil suggesting tremendous weight, and hair samples that initial analysis categorized as unidentified primate, possibly contaminated. The official investigation concluded after 3 weeks. Authorities classified the incident as a tragic wildlife attack, likely involving Asiatic black bears, despite inconsistencies with known bear behavior and attack patterns. Several rangers quietly resigned from service following the recovery operation, citing personal reasons. Bradley O'Connell relocated to Singapore later that year, accepting an English teaching position at an international school. He declined all media interviews and refused to participate in follow-up investigations. His only public statement came through a brief social media post announcing his permanent retirement from wilderness hiking and a newfound preference for urban environments with significant population density and 24-hour lighting. The northern section of Yalang Forest Reserve was temporarily closed following the incident, but reopened 6 months later with expanded warning signage about wildlife hazards. Local guides now refuse to lead groups to the area where the attack occurred, citing ancient traditions about territories where humans are not welcome. The clicking sounds Bradley described continue to be reported by rangers and visitors alike, always after sunset, always from just beyond the reach of flashlight beams. In the northeastern reaches of Argentina, where the sprawling wetlands of Santa Isidora gradually transition into fertile grasslands, the Estancia del Cielo Ranch had stood as a symbol of agricultural prosperity since the late 1800s. The 5,000-hectare property belonged to the Romero family for 4 generations, with Matias Romero inheriting the operation from his father in 1983. The region was known for its biodiversity, serving as home to capybaras, marsh deer, and occasionally jaguars that wandered from the nearby protected reserves. By 1991, Estancia del Cielo had grown into one of the region's most productive cattle operations, with over 800 head of premium Brahman cattle grazing its carefully managed pastures. Corrientes Province had always balanced modern ranching techniques with deeply rooted folkloric traditions. Local gauchos spoke of strange creatures inhabiting the transition zones between wetland and grassland, beings neither fully animal nor human that predated European settlement. Matias, trained in agricultural science, dismissed such tales as charming cultural artifacts, with no bearing on his scientific approach to cattle management. The first incidents began in March 1991, as autumn descended on the southern hemisphere. 2 yearling calves disappeared from a securely fenced paddock nearest to the property's eastern boundary, where dense stands of trees buffered the ranch from the encroaching wetlands. Matias initially suspected rustlers, though the absence of tire tracks or cut fencing puzzled him. Ranch hands reported no unusual sounds during the night, and the remaining cattle showed no signs of panic or disturbance. Within 2 weeks, 3 more animals vanished from different paddocks, each disappearance occurring during the new moon phase when darkness was most complete. Matias installed additional security measures, including heightened fence voltage and overnight patrols. During one such patrol, ranch hand Diego Mendoza reported hearing unusual vocalizations from the eastern woodlands, sounds he described as resembling distant human moaning, mixed with deep, guttural rumbles unlike any local wildlife. The most disturbing pattern emerged in early April, when Matias discovered flattened grass in perfect circular patterns near areas where cattle had disappeared. No tracks led to or from these circles, yet the grass lay completely horizontal, as though an immense weight had compressed it from above. More alarmingly, he began finding enormous barefoot impressions in the muddy areas near water troughs, tracks measuring nearly 20 inches in length, with 5 clearly defined toes, far larger than any human foot. Local police investigated, but found insufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. They suggested wild dogs, or potentially a jaguar, though no known regional predator could remove full-grown cattle without leaving blood trails or struggle marks. The disappearances accelerated through April, with 7 more animals vanishing and financial losses mounting into tens of thousands of dollars. Desperate for answers, Matias enlisted his cousin Roberto Romero, an experienced hunter who had served in the Argentinian military, to establish a night watch. Roberto positioned himself in a camouflaged blind near the eastern fence line, equipped with night vision equipment, a high-powered rifle, and a 2-way radio. Matias monitored from the main ranch house, maintaining hourly radio contact throughout the night. On the 3rd night of surveillance, April 27th, Roberto's regular check-in failed to arrive at 2 a.m. After repeated unanswered calls, Matias and 2 ranch hands drove toward the observation position. They discovered Roberto approximately 200 meters from his blind, lying unconscious at the forest edge. His equipment lay scattered in a 15-meter radius, the rifle bent at an impossible angle, as though twisted by machinery. Roberto himself bore no bite or claw marks, but his torso displayed massive bruising consistent with tremendous blunt force trauma. His clothing was torn and covered with an unidentified musky odor that caused the search dogs to whimper and retreat. Roberto regained consciousness during transport to the provincial hospital in Corrientes City. His initial statements were disjointed, but he consistently mentioned a massive figure charging from the tree line on two legs. He described the entity as over 7 feet tall, with proportions that seemed wrong: unusually long arms, a sloped forehead, and eyes that reflected red in his flashlight beam. Most disturbing was his insistence that the creature had not attacked randomly, but had deliberately disabled his rifle first, displaying intelligence and purpose beyond animal instinct. Medical examinations revealed 4 cracked ribs, a mild concussion, and extensive contusions across Roberto's back and chest. Doctors noted the unusual pattern of bruising suggested impact from something with distinct digits, as though enormous hands had struck him repeatedly. Toxicology screens showed no evidence of hallucinogens or other substances that might explain his account. The provincial police officially attributed the incident to a potential jaguar attack, despite the inconsistencies with known jaguar behavior and the absence of characteristic wounds. They suggested Roberto had hallucinated the bipedal movement and other humanoid characteristics due to concussion-related confusion. The case file remained open but inactive, classified as an unusual wildlife encounter. Following Roberto's hospitalization, Matias made radical changes to ranch operations. He installed industrial floodlights covering all eastern paddocks and relocated his cattle to fields furthest from the wetland boundary. Publicly, he cited economic restructuring as his motivation for selling the eastern parcels of his property. In private conversations with family members, however, he referenced the strange humming sound that emanated from those woods at night, a vibration felt more than heard that made his skin crawl and cattle restless. By year's end, Matias had relocated his primary residence to Corrientes City, visiting the ranch only during daylight hours and never alone. Roberto recovered physically, but refused to discuss the incident further. He abandoned his hunting hobbies entirely, sold his weapons collection, and moved to Buenos Aires, where, according to family members, he installed unusually extensive security systems in his modest apartment. The cattle disappearances ceased after Matias installed the floodlights and withdrew from the eastern boundary. Subsequent owners reported no unusual incidents, though none maintained livestock within a kilometer of the wetland transition zone. Local guides now advise visitors against overnight excursions near that section of the Ibra periphery, particularly during new moon phases when darkness is most complete and the trees seem to listen. The Shumava Mountains straddled the border between Czechoslovakia and West Germany like a wrinkled spine, their ancient slopes cloaked in one of Europe's oldest primeval forests. Deep within this wilderness, a network of largely unexplored limestone caverns honeycombed the mountain's interior. Local villagers called the largest known entrance Stracane Srce, the Lost Heart, a yawning black maw nestled between granite outcroppings and shielded by a perpetual veil of mist. For generations, shepherds and woodcutters avoided the area, citing old tales of men who entered the darkness and never returned, their voices occasionally heard on winter nights when the wind blew from the mountains. In spring 1982, amid the lingering tensions of the Cold War, the Czechoslovakian Geological Survey dispatched a team to map the cave system as part of a broader mineral resources assessment. Milan Dvorak, a 38-year-old geologist specializing in karst formations, led the 6-person expedition. Dvorak had earned his reputation mapping complex cave systems throughout Eastern Europe, approaching his work with methodical precision and scientific detachment. He dismissed the local legends as primitive superstitions born from the natural acoustic properties of limestone caverns. The survey team established their base camp in a meadow half a kilometer from the main cave entrance, erecting weatherproof tents and laying out their sophisticated mapping equipment. Initial readings indicated the cave system extended much deeper than previously documented, with potential passages stretching several kilometers into the mountain's heart. Temperature and humidity measurements suggested unusual microclimates within, promising rare mineral formations and potentially undiscovered ecosystems. Their first descent proceeded without incident, The team documented the main chamber, a cathedral-like space where stalactites hung like stone daggers from the 30-meter ceiling. Narrow side passages radiated outward like spokes from a wheel, each demanding separate exploration. The team marked their routes with fluorescent tape and established communication protocols for the increasingly complex mapping process. Dvorak noted in his field journal that unusual acoustic properties within the cavern sometimes created the impression of distant conversations or movement, though he attributed this to water droplets and air currents through restricted passages. On the second day, the team split into pairs to investigate 3 promising tunnels. Eric Weiss, an experienced spelunker from Prague, partnered with assistant geologist Katerina Novak to explore the northeastern passage, a narrow descending corridor that preliminary soundings suggested opened into a substantial secondary chamber. The pair carried standard equipment, helmets with mounted lamps, backup lighting, water, emergency rations, and communication gear. Protocol required check-ins every 30 minutes via radio. Weiss and Novak completed their first 2 scheduled communications, reporting tight but navigable conditions with interesting calcite formations. Their third check-in never arrived. After repeated failed attempts to establish contact, Dvorak organized an immediate search operation, leading the remaining team members into the northeastern tunnel. They discovered Novak alone at a junction approximately 800 meters from the main chamber, her equipment intact, but her expression vacant. Of Weiss, they found only his helmet lying in a small side passage, its lamp still illuminated, casting eerie shadows across the limestone walls. What followed was the most extensive cave search operation in Czechoslovakian history. Military personnel joined civilian experts, utilizing advanced sonar equipment to penetrate deeper into the mountain's recesses. Teams methodically explored every accessible tunnel and chamber, calling Weiss's name into the darkness. Rescue dogs brought to the site refused to enter certain passages, whimpering and retreating despite handler commands. After 72 hours, authorities scaled back the search to focus on potentially survivable areas. It was during this phase that a military technician made the most disturbing discovery: a handprint pressed into a patch of soft clay approximately 2 meters above the cavern floor, near where Weiss's helmet had been found. The impression showed 6 digits instead of 5, with elongated fingers ending in what appeared to be claw-like extensions. The technician quietly reported the finding to superiors, who sealed off that section of the cave and instructed the team not to speak further about it. Novak recovered physically, but suffered significant memory loss regarding the events leading to Weiss's disappearance. Her fragmented recollections included mention of unusual echoes that seemed to anticipate their movements, and a sudden drop in temperature just before she lost consciousness. Most unsettling was her insistence that something had watched them from recessed chambers, something that blinked. Officials ultimately attributed Weiss's disappearance to a fall into an inaccessible underwater passage, likely resulting in drowning. The geological survey concluded that the cave system contained potential instabilities and hazardous gas pockets, declaring it unsafe for further exploration. A simple memorial plaque was mounted near the main entrance, and the site was designated off-limits to the public for environmental protection reasons. Milan Dvorak submitted his final report as required, but requested immediate transfer to the Urban Development Division. Colleagues noted his uncharacteristic haste in departing the field site, leaving valuable personal equipment behind, rather than returning to retrieve it. He relocated his family from their rural home to a small apartment in Prague's densely populated center within weeks of the incident. When former colleagues inquired about his abrupt career change, Dvorak provided only vague references to family considerations. In private conversations with his wife, however, Dvorak spoke of something profoundly wrong within the mountain, an ancient presence that resented human intrusion. He described hearing rhythmic scraping sounds emanating from unmapped sections of the cave, accompanied by a distinct odor like wet fur mixed with minerals. Most significantly, he confided witnessing something moving through a distant passage during the search operation, a large, hunched silhouette that paused to turn in his direction. Milan insisted the figure had blinked at him, revealing reflective eyes that caught his headlamp beam momentarily before retreating into darkness. The Zetrasene Serdz cave system remained sealed by government order until the fall of communism in 1989, when border restrictions eased and the Shumava Mountains became part of a national park. Administrators maintained the cave closure, citing ongoing geological instability and endangered bat populations. Park rangers enforce a wide exclusion zone around the main entrance, turning away hikers who stray too close. Local residents still report unusual sounds echoing from the mountainside during winter months, sounds resembling distorted human calls interspersed with low, rhythmic humming. Wildlife studies note the curious absence of large mammals within a 3-kilometer radius of the cave entrance despite favorable habitat conditions. Most telling are the actions of the region's experienced guides, particularly after sunset when, they claim, the mist surrounding the cave entrance sometimes moves against the wind, as if breathing. The Ontario Highlands sprawled across the Canadian Shield like a rumpled emerald blanket, its dense forests punctuated by crystalline lakes and ancient granite outcroppings. Just outside the small mining town of Bancroft, these woods harbored countless hidden retreats, summer cottages and hunting cabins tucked away on unmarked logging roads and forgotten trails. One such property, a rustic A-frame structure built in the 1970s, belonged to Nathaniel Blackwood, an environmental consultant who seldom found time to visit his inherited wilderness getaway. In February 2023, Leanne McAllister, a 34-year-old graphic designer from Toronto, found herself in desperate need of solitude. Her recent divorce from her partner of 9 years had left her emotionally exhausted and creatively blocked. When Nathaniel, an old university friend, offered his rarely used cabin for a month-long retreat, Leanne eagerly accepted the chance to decompress amid nature's silence. The property's lack of internet connectivity and cell service appeared as features rather than inconveniences, a perfect digital detox to complement her emotional healing. The cabin stood in a small clearing surrounded by towering white pines and mature maples, its weathered cedar exterior blending harmoniously with the winter landscape. A winding dirt road connected to the main highway 17 kilometers away, the final stretch navigable only by 4-wheel drive or snowmobile during winter months. Nathaniel provided detailed instructions for the property's quirks: the temperamental wood stove, the hand-pumped well water system, and the gas-powered generator for emergency electricity. A satellite radio offered the only connection to the outside world, intended for weather emergencies and weekly check-ins. Leanne arrived during a light snowfall, the forest impossibly silent as fat flakes drifted between ancient trunks. The first 3 days passed in peaceful productivity as she settled into a rhythm of long walks, sketching, and journaling. The surrounding woods offered a pristine backdrop for contemplation. No traffic noise, no neighbors, no distractions beyond the occasional deer moving through the underbrush or ravens calling from high branches. On the 4th night, the first anomalies began. Leanne awakened to distinct knocking sounds against the cabin's west wall. 3 sharp raps in succession, followed by silence, then 3 more. The pattern continued for nearly 20 minutes before stopping abruptly. She rationalized the disturbance as branches swaying in the wind, though she noted in her journal that the night was unusually still, with no breeze stirring the trees visible through frost-edged windows. The following evening brought scratching sounds beneath the rear deck, persistent, deliberate movements that traveled the structure's length before stopping directly beneath her reading chair. Leanne investigated the next morning, expecting to find evidence of raccoons or perhaps a porcupine seeking shelter. Instead, she discovered the snow had been cleared from beneath the entire deck in a methodical fashion, exposing the frozen ground below. No tracks led away from the cleared area. As her first week in isolation concluded, the incidents escalated. While preparing dinner, Leanne heard a deep, guttural howl from the forest edge. Not the familiar call of wolves that occasionally echoed across the highlands, but something lower in register and oddly modulated, almost speech-like in its inflections. The vocalization repeated twice more that night, each occurrence closer to the cabin than the last. Morning revealed muddy footprints circling the entire structure, barefoot impressions in the melting snow measuring nearly 16 inches in length. They appeared human in basic structure, but with disproportionately long toes and unusual weight distribution, suggesting a gait unlike normal human movement. Most disturbingly, the tracks formed a perfect circle around the cabin, as though something had methodically patrolled the perimeter throughout the night. Increasingly concerned, Leanne radioed Nathaniel during their scheduled check-in. His response came after an uncharacteristic pause. "I didn't want to scare you with old stories, but there's a reason I don't go there much anymore." He explained that the property had developed a strange reputation among locals over the past decade. The previous caretaker had quit abruptly after reporting unwelcome visitors that left no tracks in fresh snow, yet somehow rearranged objects inside the locked cabin during his absence. Nathaniel offered to arrange immediate transportation out, but Leanne, skeptical despite her unease, declined. She had committed to her month of solitude and rationalized that acknowledging these fears meant allowing her imagination too much influence. Instead, she implemented additional security measures, placing bells on door handles and keeping the wood stove continuously burning despite milder temperatures. The pivotal incident occurred during her third week, as late February brought an unseasonable warm spell that cleared much of the accumulated snow. Around 2 a.m., Leanne awakened to the entire cabin shuddering, not the familiar creaking of thermal expansion, but sustained rhythmic pressure against the structure's foundation. Something was systematically pushing against each support post with tremendous force. A window cracked from the strain, not breaking entirely, but developing a spider web of fractures that spread across the glass. Through this compromised window, Leanne witnessed movement at the forest edge. The moonlight silhouetted what she initially mistook for swaying tree trunks until her perspective shifted, revealing these shapes stood separate from the tree line. Multiple figures, tall, broad-shouldered forms moving with unsettling coordination, retreated into the darkness as she watched. Leanne departed at first light, leaving most possessions behind as she threw essential items into her vehicle. Her hasty exit left the cabin unsecured, the door swinging open in her wake. She navigated the treacherous access road at dangerous speed, not slowing until she reached the main highway and cellular service 20 minutes later. When park rangers investigated the site 3 days later, they found the cabin undisturbed apart from the cracked window. Leanne's abandoned belongings remained in their places, though rangers noted unusual scent markings around the property perimeter that their service dogs responded to with uncharacteristic aggression. Following her return to Toronto, Leanne declined all interviews regarding her experience. Her only public comment came through a brief social media post announcing her relocation to Vancouver Island and career shift to maritime design. When former colleagues inquired about her abrupt lifestyle change, she explained simply that she now preferred places where you can see the horizon in all directions. Nathaniel Blackwood listed the cabin for sale later that spring. The property remains on the market despite substantial price reductions, with local real estate agents reporting unusual difficulties scheduling viewings. Equipment malfunctions and vehicle problems frequently prevent prospective buyers from reaching the site. Those who successfully visit often cut tours short, citing vague feelings of being unwelcome or observed. A regional wildlife survey conducted in the summer of 2023 noted abnormally low predator populations in the immediate area despite abundant prey species, a biological anomaly suggesting the presence of an unidentified dominant species within the ecosystem. Local conservation officers now advise against solo hiking in the area. According to indigenous guides, the forest belongs to something that has walked these highlands since before human memory, something that stands like a man but moves like a shadow, tolerating human presence until tolerance expires.